Can you say hard hats, folks? Hard hats, lunch pail, steel toe boots.
Anything short of a championship this year is a failure. Look at this boomer right here.
You've just got so much talent here.
Somebody said we need to apologize for Jalen.
Can I close it, John? What are we apologizing for? What did we say? What did we do? Hey, Barry Manning here. Welcome to a Friday edition of the Garden Report, as Celtics just about 4 days from opening night. Oklahoma City Thunder about a week away from their opener, and we welcome back Brandon Rahbar to talk about an intriguing team, probably alongside the Celtics, maybe one of the two most intriguing teams in the NBA entering this season, a strong favorite to win the West after their good run a year ago. And last time we were talking, Brandon, we were discussing what a Celtics Thunder final would look like last year after that great first game they played in Oklahoma City a year ago. And now a lot of people are going to look at this matchup and consider almost a foregone conclusion. Now, the West is tough. There's plenty for Oklahoma City to prove after losing that series to Dallas last year. And this is that first year with expectations, right, after the breakout year. So it's a little different going into this year compared to where the Thunder were a year ago. But it's hard to not look at that team after adding Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein, and we'll get to his injury to begin the season here. But one of the best off seasons in the NBA, and it almost felt a little underrated how great their off season was.
Yeah, adding Alex Caruso and just flipping Josh Giddey for him. You know, Josh Giddey, I do still think has a lot of potential as a young upside player. He just doesn't fit on this Thunder squad when you need to put the ball in his hands to be effective. But you can't take the ball out of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's hands or J-Dub's hands. But to flip Josh Giddey without giving up any first-round picks and to get an all-NBA defensive player and Alex Caruso and a guy that shot 40% from three. So he's a two-way player. The defense for this Thunder team should kind of go to another level. They were top 5 in offense and defense last year, much like the Celtics. And they add Caruso and then adding Hartenstein, again, without having to give up anything because they got him in free agency. So didn't really lose anybody in the rotation besides Josh Giddey. And you add Caruso, you add Hartenstein, 2 elite role players, and all these young guys. The team is so young. So internal development, you got to figure, Chet's going to get better. J-Dub's going to get better. Cason Wallace, a lot of these core players should get better. So really, really good offseason for the Thunder for sure.
Yeah, and they addressed their biggest need in Hartenstein, who goes down with a hand injury to begin this year. So not devastating, no surgery required from what I've read so far. So that's a positive. I was interested to see what he and Chet were going to look like early on, though. And that's a duo. If they are going to play together, that probably will require some reps and an adjustment for Chet, certainly, who played pretty much all his minutes at center last year, having to move over that 4 spot. So maybe delays their development together a little bit, or at least getting to know each other's games and playing off each other, and just going to a new style for the Thunder team that loved to play small last year, that played fast, that had a bunch of ball handlers on the perimeter, going more toward a double big lineup, which we've seen some other teams run successfully, Cleveland, even Boston. So they needed this dimension, but the reps it's going to take to get it to work and to see what it's capable of and when they need to go to it get delayed by this a little bit.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate for OKC because it's a small sample size, but in the preseason, the minutes that they played together, it looked really promising. I mean, that size that the Thunder can throw out there. Chet's 7'1" and has a 7'6" wingspan. Isaiah Hartenstein is 7 foot, 240 pounds. I mean, these two together, that Dallas series, the Thunder actually outscored the Mavs when Chet was on the floor. It was the minutes that Chet was off the floor that the Mavs really took advantage of the Thunder because they didn't have another big to throw out there. So to have Hartenstein, like you said, really does shore up the biggest weakness: size, rebounding, physicality, rim protection when Chet sits. Being able to play those guys together, just the versatility that they can have with those two guys. So yeah, it's a bummer that they're going to miss a lot of reps together. The news was 5 to 6 weeks. He'll be reevaluated. Of course, it's a week until the season starts. So you figure 4 or 5 weeks into the season. So we're talking a month and a half, maybe 15 to 20 games that Hartenstein misses. This is a guy, he only missed 7 combined games the last 2 seasons. So he's been really durable. So it's just a really unfortunate injury. But like you said, looks like no surgery. So not devastating. Majority of the season, he'll still be out there.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, 50% shooting from Chet in the preseason through the first 4 games, I believe. I don't know if those numbers are included tonight's, and he showed last year that he can knock those down. So that's the one thing that made you think, as they made that adjustment, that this will work. But how do you imagine that combination looking, specifically offensively? Because it does alter where Chet is on the floor a little bit. Hartenstein, you love him at the 5, especially the way he can create. But is it going to look like that Knicks version of Hartenstein necessarily? What did you start to see in the preseason when those two were out there together on offense?
Yeah, so we saw Chet, playing on the perimeter, because he can shoot. He shot 37% from 3 last year, and he shot nearly 40% from 3 at college. So he's a shooter. He brings a big out. Hartenstein, we saw him. He's a great screener, and like the space he can provide for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and for J-Dub on drives. But we also, he's got that floater, that little 5-foot floater. That's money. One of the most efficient floaters in the game. We've seen those two guys already kind of screening for each other, opening up space for the other. And we've seen the biggest thing that stood out to me was Hartenstein's passing and playmaking. He's a really good passer for a big, and like him creating from the high post and him looking for J-Dub, Chet, Shai, Dort, and all those guys. The creation, I think, that he brings kind of brings another element to this team. And then, of course, the offensive rebounding, and then just allowing Chet to kind of roam offensively, because Chet can score down low. He can score from the perimeter. I do think that the Thunder will try to encourage Hartenstein to shoot as well from the three-point line. He didn't really show that in the preseason, but they've talked about it in training camp. He flashed a little bit of that with the Clippers, not so much with the Knicks at all, but I think it's something they want to kind of look into, because the Thunder would still like to play 5 out if they could, but Hartenstein's kind of roamed all over, and so is Chet.
Yeah, they're going to go back and forth there. That's always interesting to me, because I remember a year ago, Porzingis comes into the Celtics and Horford's rolls and flex, and it's like, oh, you can play them together sometimes, play Porzingis solo sometimes, and maybe go matchup based there. But they ended up just playing Porzingis at center all year, Horford off the bench all year, and went with one look there. Are they going to go back and forth between that 5-out look and maybe bring Hartenstein off the bench sometimes? Or do you think when those two are out there, they're just going to start together?
Yeah, so I think that it's going to be kind of fluid. Like, we know for sure the core 4 of the Thunder that's been there will start. I know I've seen some people assume that Dort would come off the bench now that the Thunder have Caruso and Hartenstein. Dort's going to start for sure. It's going to be SGA, Dort, J-Dub, and Chet. And then that 5th starter, I think sometimes will be Caruso, sometimes will be Hartenstein. It could be matchup dependent. The Thunder haven't really tipped their hat at all. When all those guys played, one game Hartenstein started, Caruso came off the bench. Another game, Caruso started, and Hart came off the bench. So I think that, I don't know if that was Daigneault, keeping teams guessing, keeping fans guessing, keep all of us guessing, or if it's going to be matchup dependent, or they just don't want to, reveal their cards. I imagine, knowing Daigneault, he'll settle in on a typical starting lineup, but won't be afraid to change it up matchup wise. I think for the most part, Caruso is going to start and Hartenstein will come off the bench. But a team that's really big, I think Hart will start alongside Chet.
Yeah, it makes sense, because then you have both of them in rotation. You could go to both of them at the same time sometimes if you want to bring in the other Jalen Williams. So it gives you a little bit of flexibility there, especially when you do have that third big in the mix. I do want to talk about Caruso a little bit, but first, shout out to our sponsors here, Prize Picks. Great weekend to go over Prize Picks football game, still rolling college and pro, and it's just you against the numbers over at Prize Picks, our official daily fantasy sports partner here at CLNS Media. Use the code CLNS right now. Play $5, get $50 instantly. And for opening night, Wolves Lakers on Tuesday, you'll get a free Anthony Edwards square as well. So if you run a 2-player lineup, You got one for free there already with Edwards on Tuesday night. So go check that out for the start of the basketball season as well. And again, use that code CONS. 2 more players, pick more or less than their projections. It's that easy. And unlike these full season fantasy leagues where whether it's basketball or football, guys are going down left and right, you're just picking for that one game, that one weekend, and there's even injury insurance over on Prize Picks. So your season won't be ruined by an injury. So go over to Prize Picks again, use that code CLNS, and check out the Game Time app right now, whether it's for opening night or any Celtics game this season or Thunder game. Go over there, use that code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, panoramic views of your seats, see where you're going to be sitting. All in pricing lets you know exactly what you're going to be paying. It's a great experience over there. And sometimes the best deals are right up until or even a little bit after game time. So that's a great experience to get over at Game Time. And again, use that code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So it doesn't look like he's played a ton so far, but first impressions of Caruso, who I think everybody looked at that trade and thought slam dunk. It's just a no-brainer, especially not giving up picks. I do, the more I think about it, like it a little bit more for Chicago and think there's some good merits on both sides there. That's not to say that it's a massive loss giving up Josh Giddey for the Thunder, who by the end of the playoffs there looked like it was time for both sides to move on from that arrangement there. And he got off to such a great start in Oklahoma City to his career. And, Shai just ends up taking over the ball at time, like you mentioned. It's just not as natural for Giddey playing off the ball. So I think in the end, a good trade for both teams. Caruso, like you imagine a Celtics Thunder finals matchup, and you need that extra wing defender alongside Dort to be able to defend the Browns and Tatums of the world. So it makes a ton of sense in that aspect. And also adds some 3-point shooting to a team that was already really good at that a year ago. So you don't lose anything in that regard. So this is, I think we spoke about it last time we talked, a team that needed to make that next move, that needed to consolidate a little bit, make a splash. And they got that done with Caruso and didn't even need to give up the stockpile of picks. But what's been your impression of how he fits in on this team so far?
Yeah, he so far fits in seamlessly. Like, just being able, I think he's a guy that on any contender he would fit really well, just because he's a smart player and he makes winning plays. And the defense obviously speaks for itself. All NBA first team 2 years ago, All NBA second team last year. He can guard 1 through 4 really, which is wild given his size. But also offensively, being able to space the floor and shoot 40% from 3. He doesn't require the ball, but he's able to move the ball. So with the Thunder, they're built around Shai, J-Dub, and Chet to be able to kind of slot him in. He's a perfect fit next to Dort, Shai, J-Dub, like all these perimeter defenders. And like I said, like he can guard a point guard one night. Maybe Dort will guard a point guard that night, and he goes over to shooting guard. Maybe he'll guard a small forward. He can guard up and down the lineup. So to have that versatility on this Thunder team, I really do think he really is kind of a perfect fit for what they're trying to do. And, looking ahead, just because, you've mentioned it and it's kind of the favorite pick right now is Celtics Thunder, just like thinking about, possible matchups with the Celtics, since they're the best team in the NBA, defending champs, and kind of what, I think that the Thunder in a lot of ways are kind of building their team like the Celtics built their team. You got like the MVP candidate and Jason Tatum and Shai. You got the second scorer named Jaylen Brown and Jalen Williams. you got the 7-foot big that can block shots and shoot threes with Porzingis and Chet. You got the perimeter defender elite wise that can shoot threes and like Drew Holiday and Alex Caruso. Then you got that other defender, kind of jack of all trades with Derek White and Lou Dort. So kind of like, and then you got that bench big. That's a great big that would start for a lot of teams, and Al Horford and Isaiah Hartenstein. So just like a lot of similarities. So I think like, in comparison wise, it's kind of like Alex Caruso is kind of like the Drew Holiday trade. I feel like for the Celtics, not saying like it'll yield the same results or the Thunder are going to go to the finals or win a finals or anything, but I just kind of see that parallel. It felt like that kind of trade to me.
Yeah, especially since you look a year ago and even 2 years ago when the Celtics made the White trade, they gave up a lot. There were questions, is he the right piece for this team at this moment? And I think it was a lot more divisive at the time, whether that was the right move for Boston. and it ends up just working perfectly. And then the Drew trade ends up being that no-brainer. With both, though, you never imagined that those would be, because Brown and Tatum took some real steps last year, and they were the driving forces. But when you looked at the backcourt, especially considering that those guys ended up going to the Olympics and being such key parts of that team too, that backcourt and those guys that you made moves for along like the ancillary part of the roster ended up being like so central, so consistent. And when you think about it, like Porzingis went down, they won games without him. They went undefeated without Brown during the year, but it was really that like Holiday White combination that you couldn't live without on this roster. So to be able to get a piece like Caruso here that adds similar elements does speak to whether you're a contender or a team trying to build toward that. Those are the kind of pieces you really need alongside the stars, maybe as much as the stars. And they went out and got that pretty easily here. Like, you didn't have to give up draft picks like the Celtics did for Holiday or White in that case. And I didn't even know he played for Oklahoma City before. I found that out within the last week or so. So that was like another cool way of the story. But it is fascinating, this matchup, as we start to imagine it super early here, because you mentioned all the pieces and how they line up and how many similarities there are across the rosters. But I also just look at the way the Thunder play. And the one thing I said last year going into the playoffs is, like, if the Celtics play their game, if they do what they need to do, they're going to win this thing. There's no team out there. There's no super team. There's no threat that really scares you, like, to use that word scare. I feel similarly this year, but if all goes well in Oklahoma City, if they make it to the finals like they're supposed to, if they do everything they need to, and both teams get to the finals healthy, and you mentioned just all the way like those pieces almost cancel each other out, I feel like that finals is a toss-up. Not to say like you're terrified of Oklahoma City or you're going to lose to them or it's just this insurmountable force, but you go into that series, like when the Celtics went into the series against the Mavs last year, I was like, they got this. Like, I had some concerns about Porzingis, but the matchup was so good for Boston. You go into a series against the Thunder, the way it looks like they're going to succeed this year, you're more like, oh, this is going to be a tough one. Like, this could go either way. I don't know.
Yeah, it really does. There really are so many parallels and similarities. And the Thunder, just like the Celtics are they're just so deep. They have you need top end talent to win. And both the Celtics, obviously, and the Thunder have that, and Tatum and Brown and Shai and J-Dub and Chet and those pieces. I just the matchup is fascinating. The difference obviously right now being that the Celtics have been there, done that, proven it, had the experience, and that's what the Thunder are trying to be. And this will be their first, go around with this version of the team, adding Caruso and Hartenstein. They got some playoff experience last year, made it to the second round. They were one play away, one foul away from a game 7 against the Mavs, for the chance to go to the Western Conference Finals. So, this young team got some playoff experience last season. And yeah, I think the biggest thing is just health. And, today was a tough day for the Thunder, finding out that Hartenstein is going to be out 5 to 6 weeks. And in the preseason game tonight, Jalen Williams hurt his ankle. Hopefully it's not a serious one. They're going to reevaluate it. By the time this goes out, it'll be today. So hopefully we'll have some encouraging news there. So I think, health is always the big question mark for every team. You just never know. But, given health, I mean, to me, the Celtics are obviously the class of the East, and I do think that the Thunder on paper are the class of the West right now.
Yeah, for sure. And health's always the biggest caveat. I think the difference for the two teams is the Celtics are in a conference that is still the weaker of the two conferences, I would say, especially at the bottom end. You're probably getting a layup first round if you're Boston. Second round, manageable as well. Last year was Cleveland. It was pretty tough, but not a team you're likely going to lose to if you're Boston rolling at full speed. For the Thunder, you start to think about the bottom of the West, and it's like round 1, do you get a fully loaded New Orleans team? I know that ended up being a bit of a breeze from last year, but Zion goes down. Do you get Denver team somewhere along the way, and you have to contend with Jokic? Mavericks still, again, that's like, I don't think they're the favorite in the West by any means or even close, but they can beat any team in the West with Luka and Kyrie and that team they have there. So that's the biggest hurdle to me, alongside health, obviously, in this matchup happening, is that the Thunder are just going to run up against something extremely difficult in every single round, in all probability. So when you look at the matchups along the way in the West and some of the contenders out there, fellow contenders, and even just the things that, you have to factor in for the Thunder internally, aside from health, what do you think is going to be the biggest factor in them reaching the finals or not?
No, I think you nailed it. I think the other big thing is just the West being so stacked. I mean, there's a good chance, like they were very close to having to play the Lakers and LeBron and Anthony Davis in the first round. And obviously, those guys are older, but it's still LeBron and Anthony Davis in a 7-game series. You never know.
Yeah.
It could be, like you said, the Pelicans should be even better this year. They got Zion back. They got DeJounte Murray. It could be the Kings, who added DeMar DeRozan alongside De'Aaron
Memphis.
Fox. Yeah, Memphis with Ja Morant back, and we haven't seen that team with Marcus Smart. So the West it's tough. The contenders you feel like are the Thunder, the Mavs, the Wolves, and the Nuggets. That's kind of like everybody's pick for the top 4 teams, like the home court advantage teams. But even after that, I mean, the Suns, they got a little bit deeper
Phoenix.
this season. Yeah, they're going to be healthier. When all 3 of those guys were healthy last year, they won at a pretty good pace. So there's no easy matchups in the West. Even round 1, you're just kind of like trying to dodge a bullet and hoping you get like a decent matchup, that for your own personal team that you match up well with. But it's just so rough in the West.
Are they a level above? I feel like in the regular season they could be, but in the playoffs it's going to be tougher. And I feel like they're going to get there, but man, it could be it could just be grueling. And sometimes that determines the finals, right? I feel like that was a factor in the Celtics Mavs outcome last year too, is the Celtics didn't play any more than 5 games along the way, and Mavs are just scraping through that Oklahoma City series, and then they got to fight with the Wolves, and even back to round 1, the Clippers. It's just all an uphill battle in the West.
Yeah, it really is. And we haven't even mentioned like Steph Curry and the Warriors. I mean, like, they're older. They haven't done anything in a couple of years, but it's still Steph Curry, and Draymond should play a full season if he doesn't get in any sort of trouble this year. And they added a couple of pieces. I mean, it's just so tough in the West. All that said, though, I do think it speaks to like how strong this OKC roster is, that, they're the youngest team to ever be a 1 seed last year in a loaded West. They were the youngest team ever to win a playoff series. And despite the West being even stronger this year, there's really only 2 teams, the Jazz and the Blazers, that everybody's like, okay, those are like Cooper flag teams. Every other team, depending on what you think about Kawhi Leonard's health and what he'll, do for the Clippers this year, that could be a possible, play-in team at the very worst. So I think it speaks, though, to the strength of this OKC roster, that still, despite this West, that everybody kind of is writing them in as the favorites to win the West.
Yeah, and a big factor there too, if it does come down to Boston, Oklahoma City, and even some of these series here, Dallas, Oklahoma City, potentially is the best player in the series, and Shai gives the Thunder that case in pretty much all these series that they'll face, except maybe Denver. If you go up against them. So I want to get into that. There's some rankings that came out this week as well that look pretty favorable for Shai. Some mixed results for Tatum there, but I want to shout out Nutrafol back here on the Garden Report, and we're well into fall by now. Our busy schedules have already started, and Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand, trusted by over 1 million people for thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months. So you get started now as the fall is getting going, as you get into that schedule, and just make it part of your routine, like back to school activities, tighter work deadlines, basketball games. We're going to 1 million of them soon when the season starts this week. So if you're interested in having hair that grows faster, stronger, and longer while dealing with all the stress and sleep and eating routines that you're trying to develop to have a healthy lifestyle, Nutrafol addresses what can cause thinning hair for men and women. A one-size-fits-all approach to hair growth doesn't cut it. So Nutrafol has multiple formulas for men and women that are tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors. So you can get just what you need. So get results you can run your fingers through for a limited time. Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code GARDEN. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair at Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code GARDEN. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code GARDEN. So I think we had this discussion last time, Brandon. Shai, Tatum, those two vying for MVP, vying for top status in the league. And I had this conversation with Keith Pompey in Philly because it's almost a similar thing with Embiid, Tatum. They're in that same category. They're both fighting at a similar echelon in the league. Many people would probably flip their spots depending on which side of it you fall. But in a lot of these lists, and even the MVP voting last year and going into this year, these rankings, Shai right ahead of Tatum, right there on the same level, but pretty much on everyone's list, including mine, squarely ahead of Tatum. That slight edge over him in these rankings, usually right around 4 behind that Giannis, Luka, Jokic trio. That seems to be where he fits in. Is that how you generally feel about it? Like, how close do Tatum and Shai compare? If they ended up in a series, who would have the edge there between those two?
Yeah, I think it's really, really close. And I do agree. I think, Jokic is one. But, I think after that, Luka, Giannis, Shai, Tatum, and Embiid, I think there's a clear top 6 right now. Like, to me, there's a drop off after those 6, and it's like Curry, KD, Anthony
Older
Edwards.
guys.
Yeah, the older guys, LeBron, AD, those guys. But I think those top 6, I do have Shai just a hair above Tatum. And I know, like, Tatum has proven it. He's won a championship. He's been the guy. They're actually like the same age. I think everybody thinks that Shai is younger just because, Tatum's been around for so long and he's been in the playoffs for so long. But I think, like, when you look at, like, overall numbers and just the fact that, Shai led a team that was the youngest team ever to the 1 seed in a stacked West. And, you can look at, like, playoffs, but, like, he outplayed Luka in that, the Mavs beat the Thunder, and Luka was probably not 100%. I'll say that. But Shai was the best player in that series. So, like, Shai had an incredible, but I do have Shai just a tad above Tatum.
Yeah, and I think the playmaking probably the biggest factor there. You probably give Tatum a edge in the 3-point department, despite that fluctuating a little bit for him, at least recently in this preseason. He's turned it around, which is a big factor for him going into this year. So that's a big one he has, along with height, size, defense, close for those two. Shai's just such a great defender too, and Tatum, when he reaches his highest level, is pretty great too on that end. So much of their game's comparable. Shai does things so much better inside the arc, the mid-range game, getting to the free throw line. All those are edges for him. So I think it comes down to that playmaking, and Shai has that edge for now. Tatum took a serious step with it last year, and even this preseason, some of the reads he's making, some of the passes he's making, and obviously the teammates around him that he can set up consistently. If you're Tatum, can you get to 6 assists a game this year, 7 assists a game like you saw in the playoffs and finals from him? That's where I think he starts to close the gap with Shai and certainly the other guys here. But obviously it was a divisive summer for Tatum. The Olympic thing, all those, the perception, the way he celebrated, whatever people want to nitpick about his run and even the Celtics run. How did you come out of that feeling about him and where he's at in his career and just how you look at him as a player?
I mean, like I said, I think he's a top 6 player in the NBA. And what's funny is all the guys that we both have ranked above him are all international players. So to me, he's the best American basketball player in the world right now. I really do think he is. So I was confused as anybody else was by his playing time in the Olympics. I didn't get it. Didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I don't even know how to explain that. But at the end of the day, the dude is 26 years old and he just won a world title. He was the best player on a championship team. He won gold medal. and he's consensus ranked as a top 6-7 player in the world. So I think there's only a certain amount of guys that can be the best player on a title team, and you feel like your team is a true contender. I know that Boston has a lot of talent. I know he's got a lot of talent around them. I know they're really deep, but you still have to have that top tier talent. And Tatum is one of those guys. I think he's, you can count on two hands, I think, like the guys that you need to lead a team to win a championship. And Tatum is one of those guys. Like, regardless of where he's ranked, if you have him at, 2, 3, or 6, 7, he's one of those dudes.
Yeah, because it's tiers as much as anything, right? These guys are on a similar level, and some of them even play different positions, some different roles, and Embiid, Jokic cases, Giannis too, certainly. So it's tough to separate them and parse them sometimes. But I felt pretty good about Tatum at 5 in almost any list I can put together, ahead of Embiid because of the health too. And that is the most underrated thing about him. And I, reading the different lists today, never missed more than 8 games in a year, Tatum, and a lot of that's been rest. He's just available every game, and that maybe is the most underrated factor that makes a great player in today's league over anything, because so many of these guys just aren't available. And Kawhi going down today, how does that impact his ranking? If you're going into a year and looking at it, it should impact it greatly, I would think. And of course, Thunder on their pick, which, despite all the bad news for Oklahoma City today, I guess that's some solace that things aren't looking too good in Clipper land. And man, that could really end up being an all-time trade as we start to think about it right now.
Yeah. The fact you're absolutely right. The Hartenstein and J-Dub injury news was rough, but the Thunder already got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and J-Dub from that trade, and now if
he was in that too.
Yeah, J-Dub was in that trade too. That one of the picks that they got ended up being J-Dub. And so, this is a stacked draft. Like, everybody talks about Cooper Flag, but there's like 5 like kind of franchise guys at the top of this draft. And then like 6 through 12 are still like really, really good players. I'm no draft guru by any means, but like being a Thunder fan during the rebuild, I've kind of become like a novice draft guy. And so I've been kind of looking into this draft with the Thunder having that Clippers swap. And if the Clippers ends up being a top 10 pick, which, if Kawhi doesn't play, half the season this season, which who knows, but he's out indefinitely to start the season, that could be a top 10 pick for the Thunder. And regardless of whether it's Cooper Flag or not, if it's just a top 10 pick, that's going to end up being a really, really good player that the Thunder gets. So they could, possibly be, top of the West and then get a top 10 pick, which the Celtics would know about that as well. So, one of,
I was just going to say, add it to the parallels. Yeah, that's exactly how they got Tatum and Brown, was that KG trade and Pierce trade to Brooklyn that brought back all those picks. So it's amazing how similarly these two teams came together, and now they could be on a collision course. General thoughts on the Celtics going into this year? Are they just going to roll like they did for much of last year? I know Porzingis is going to miss a little bit of time here, and Horford's getting a little bit older, taking it slow into the preseason. So there's some questions going in, but the way they played this preseason for the most part, even into their bench units, look pretty dominant, pretty similar to last year.
Yeah. And by the way, I should say, I think you talked me into ranking Tatum above Embiid because of the health thing. I think I'm with you. I'll go from 6 to 5 for Tatum. Put Embiid down at 6.
It's tough. I mean, like, Embiid might have him head-to-head, skill-wise, numbers, all that, but he just misses so much time in the biggest moments, too. And Tatum's beat him in many series now, too, multiple series. So that's a consideration, too.
No, big time for sure. And he's already said that he's not going to play back-to-backs maybe for the rest of his career. So when you look at that one, like looking at the Celtics this season in the East, I think the East got better because the Knicks got better. The 76ers got better with the Paul George trade. But right now, Paul George is hurt to start at the beginning of the season. I think he'll be back soon. But Embiid, health is always in doubt. I think the Bucks will be better because they're going to be healthier. I think the Magic obviously got better. That defense should be really good. The Cavs should be solid. But ultimately, in the East, I think that the Celtics, I think that the Knicks or 76ers probably the toughest competition. I don't know. I just don't see any scenario where if the Celtics are healthy that they lose to the Knicks or Bucks or 76ers. I just don't see it. So yeah, I have the Celtics, provided health coming out of the East this year. And like you said, like the first round, like I don't even know, whether it's like the Heat or whoever they would play in the first round. Like they don't even have to worry about that. So yeah, I think that
I'd worry about the Heat. I'm
well, that's
never
true.
gonna
Yeah,
stop
that's
worrying
true.
about the Heat.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point.
Even
Yeah.
after last year.
Yeah, true. That's a very, very true statement. That is a good call. Good call. But yeah, I it's just tough for me to see any team because because they won a championship, and I think because they have Horford, who's older, and Porzingis, who's a little bit older, little bit. People see this as like an experience. This is still a really young team too. Like the Celtics are young too. They're not as young as the Thunder, but I mean, like Tatum and Brown and those. I mean, their two best players are still incredibly young. So I don't think by any means that the Celtics are going to be any worse this season. I think they're still the odds-on favorites to come out of the East for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned Horford, it just pops in my head again. Thunder.
Yeah, that's right. Another
Like,
similarity. Yeah.
that's like a great chapter to that story. When the book gets written and all that, is just that year he spent there, reviving his career, playing well. Like I remember watching him there in Oklahoma City and just being like, all right, that looks more like Horford again. And then, we start talking Kemba trades that time of year, and all of a sudden Horford's back in Boston and looking like he never left. And man, the last 3 years of him, and he pretty much played center the whole run last year while Porzingis was out. It's unreal what he's doing at 38. And that's another factor in that, if it does come down to Boston and the Thunder, he's just such a rock come playoff time, doing all the right things. Defensively is almost as good as ever. Like there's not enough you can say about that. And when you look back on it, like the Thunder really did the Celtics a solid there. Like taking on Kemba, they got one pick out of it that wasn't even that great. Like
Yeah.
they really like jump started the Celtics turnaround with that trade.
Yeah, the Thunder and Celtics, like with all the parallels and everything, they've had a really good relationship as far as like trades throughout history. Like they have like some sort of like mutual,
Kendrick
thing going on. But
Perkins, Jeff Green.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So there's been this like kind of established relationship, and it was cool. Like Al Horford, his whole time here, he was so classy, such a good dude, and like was a good leader for such a young team. And it was kind of the first kind of tease of what Shea could be with a center like that who could stretch the floor. Like their two-man game was really, really impressive. That was supposed to be a tanking year. And when Shea and Horford were out there, they were winning too much. Like the Thunder were winning too many games with those two just because Horford was so good. He was supposed to be washed when he was with Philly. Then he came to the Thunder and he looked great. And so it's kind of like a preview of what, Shea could do with somebody like Chet. So like Thunder fans love Horford. He was only here for a season and he only played half the season. But the organization and fans really, really like the guy.
So it's looking way ahead, and we'll hope that's going to happen because, again, it's such an intriguing matchup. But what do you think a Celtics Thunder finals would look like? What do you think this matchup would look like if it comes down to it? And we do have to wait until, I think, January, right, for these two teams to face off. So it's going to be a little while, but hopefully by that point, Hartenstein's back and healthy, and Porzingis certainly probably going to be back in the mix by that point as well. So at least they'll give us these two teams healthy when it does happen.
Yeah, I think some of it will be like who gets home court advantage. And I think that you feel like you got to favor the Celtics there because they should get more wins in the East, like especially with those bottom tier teams. So if you feel like the Celtics have the home court advantage and they have the playoff experience, they're the reigning champs, you feel like you got to, favor them. Because I do think just like roster wise, you can make an argument either. I really do think there's so many similarities and parallels, and we kind of went through the top six guys. But even after that, I know that the Celtics have some good depth past their top six, and so do the Thunder with like Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins and Cason Wallace. Like both of these teams are so stacked. Some will be like, who's hot, who goes cold, home court advantage. I think truly if the Thunder get there, that means that they've become playoff tested between what we saw last season and whatever happens this postseason. If they go through a gauntlet of like Lakers, Nuggets, Mavs, Wolves, whoever it is, like by that point, they will be battle tested. So at that point, I truly do think it could be a toss-up series. Like, I don't want to predict who would win right now. I just think that the two teams are so evenly matched on paper. I think that some of it's just kind of be home court and who gets hot.
Yep, January 5th, Celtics Thunder in Oklahoma City. March 12th, the Boston matchup between those two. And who knows, you got the in-season tournament too, so maybe something comes together there. So we'll anxiously await this matchup between these teams. Take care of our friend too here at the Garden Report, Josue Pavone, heading out to cover the Thunder this year for Clutch Points. So we'll have some coverage from our former teammate here, Josue, and get him on board for some talk as well. So he'll be out in Oklahoma City covering them this year. And of course, show some love to Brandon, good friend of the show, Daily Thunder. Want to tell the people where they can find your work?
Yeah, they can find me at dailythunder.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Brandon Rahbar.
All right, Brandon, good talking to you. We'll catch up later this season. And opening night going to be Thursday in Denver, right? Thunder Nuggets, so a good one right off the bat.
Yeah. Could be a possible Western Conference title preview. We'll see. Like, really, really good game to start off for sure. Thanks for having me, man.
Yep, no doubt. And that'll do it for us tonight. Practice coverage coming your way Friday afternoon for the Celtics. Saturday they'll be practicing as well. We'll wait the Lonnie Walker news. A lot of people interested in which way that's going to go. Saturday afternoon, 5 o'clock, the deadline on that front. And we'll be back for a post-game show of opening night, the first game of the NBA season, Celtics-Knicks, another great matchup, and potentially an East Conference Finals preview. Ring night, banner night, really special night in Boston coming up on Tuesday, and we'll have coverage of it all at the Garden. Show some love to our sponsors, Prize Picks. Use that code CLNS over there. Use CLNS over at Game Time for $20 off your first purchase. And Nutrafol, use the code GARDEN over there for 10 months. Or $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping. Thanks again to Brandon, and we'll talk to you soon. By Manning, and this has been the Garden Report.
Wait, Ahmed's got an outro for us, I think.
No, he doesn't.
He said he was going to work on an outro.
He had a phenomenal game.
Phenomenal game.
Forfeit's out. I think it's an auction. That did not sound like a chair.
It was a freaking chair. It does sound like a chair.